So hello, everybody. It's 5:29 p.m. Pacific. And we are expecting people here in the webinar room, but we're also live streaming on Facebook. And then we'll be uploading to YouTube later as we do each month. Would love to know where you're listening from. And oh, that's interesting. Okay, you have it on yours. Okay, and what your hopes are for this evening. We also would love to drawing a blank. I'm Spacey. I still have COVID brain. Was sick for a week or plus, and so yeah. What do we usually do at the beginning of this?
Welcome, everyone. We usually start with creating the space and telling the purpose and introducing ourselves. Do we want captions on here too or no?
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Bear with us. We have a little tech stuff going on today. And trying to get so that we have.
There we go. It is on.
Okay, great.
Okay, we forget and we're sorry. I actually am hearing impaired, and there's other things that we all experience. And so we really want to make sure this webinar is accessible to all. So yes, welcome everyone. And those of you on Facebook, those of you here in the actual webinar, delighted to have you, and just wanted to start by acknowledging the land that we're on. We're on Ohlone land, and all land is Indigenous land. We accept, value, welcome, hope to hear and see all races, genders, cultures, abilities, and sexual orientations. We have been working very hard to create a safe space in which people can land softly. And I use that term coined by a friend of mine, Sonia Renee Taylor. Her Instagram is located in the resources that we provide, whether you access those through Eventbrite or get them in the follow-up email that we send out. I just love the way she phrases that, because we cannot always guarantee safety, but we can give a safe space where people can land softly, as opposed to with hurt or more damage. So I will turn it over to Jody to read the purpose of our webinar, which is kind of evolving.
So Misha actually created this webinar and then asked me to co-host it with her. And it was created to engage in honest and authentic conversations about the long time injustice of racism in America. During the webinars, we discuss systemic racism in an effort to dismantle white supremacy from the inside out. Our intention with these webinars is to participate in sustainable action and highlight the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color community members, giving them a safe space to be heard about their own experiences, challenges, and hopes without the need to educate white people. We also provide resources to increase listeners' ability to self-educate towards becoming a more learned ally.
Yeah. And you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah,
well, those of you who are just coming on, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, if you have any particular topic that is of interest to you. And then also those of you on Facebook, if you'd like to let us know where you're watching from and if there's a topic that is of interest to you.
Yes, and my name again is Jody Lewis. I am an attorney. I work for a nonprofit organization providing appellate representation for survivors of domestic violence. And my legal career has mostly been, whether it be at the trial court level or appellate level, representing survivors of domestic and sexual violence. It is really an honor to be doing these webinars with Misha, and I'm really honored that she invited me to do them, and mostly to hear from members of our community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and to open up more. I lived as a white woman. I have a lot of privilege and have lived in that white bubble too long, and I'm really trying to learn more and educate myself more, and so I can be a learned ally. And yeah, so it's just really such a privilege to be here and to be able to hear the different voices and stories that we've heard, and to be able to share that with others, and go from there.
And I am Misha Safran. I am an academic life coach working with students who struggle with using their voice, and voice empowerment coach, also executive functioning. I work with adults, LGBTQIA adults and youth, to empower their voices and self-advocate for themselves. And I've also recently become a leadership development and trainer, and also doing diversity, equity, inclusion, access, justice, and belonging work with organizations, which has been quite an honor and hard work. And yeah, we've been doing these webinars for over 2 years now. We started in May of 2020 and have had a variety of guests from month to month, and some months we don't have guests, and that's okay too. We have a lot of information that we love to provide, resources. And if there's anyone here who would like to also participate in the conversation, we welcome you to join us here on video, or simply use the chat to express your voice. And again, any topics that are particularly sensitive to you, or maybe you're not as informed, we'll do the best we can. We're not the experts per se on anybody's life. But we can certainly talk more about the things that we've compiled as resources from a variety of platforms. But also, we do invite you to go and watch previous webinars that are on my YouTube channel. I believe you can just look it up by the title of this, a Candid Conversation about systemic racism, or Misha, but I will also, Misha Safran, but I will also put the links in the chat, and then you'll also get a follow-up email. So the chat is disabled. Oh my goodness. Thank you for letting us know. Let me see if I can fix that. That is not good. I think it's because we were, okay. We want you to be able to chat with everyone. So try it again, please.
Yeah.
Thank you for
letting us
know. My goodness, that doesn't make this a very open conversation. So thank you so much for letting us know. And if you're on Facebook also, of course, we want to hear from you. Oh, yay, it's working. Thank you so much. Yay. Also, those of you, fabulous. Those of you that are in the webinar, we work really hard to remind ourselves not to use your first names or any names that you have there, unless you say it's okay. Like if we can say, for example, let's say there's a Sam on the webinar, we really appreciate Sam's comment, or thank you, Sam, for letting us know the chat wasn't working. If you could just say yes, if it's okay to mention your first name in the chat, that would be great. Otherwise, we will work really hard just to say a participant or somebody who's watching has made a comment. But it does make it easier when we can say the names, but no pressure. Yeah, so that's Jody. This is Misha, and we are going to the next section.
So tonight we were not able to have a guest. So I want to reiterate again, if anyone that is attending the webinar and you want to actually come on with us to engage in conversation, please let us know, and we can do that. And or if you want to be putting any comments, thoughts in the chat, that's great too. But to start us off anyway, we thought we'd talk a little bit about housing, and this has come up in a number of ways for both of us recently, but I had been doing a lot of research on it anyway, and then we're going through the process. We just bought a house, and it's brought up a lot on a number of levels for me between my research and I'm writing about it, because as a white woman, and coming from the family I've come from, generations after generations, my family have had the ability to own property and the privilege to do so. And I also have had that privilege. And I, it was interesting because I was talking to my parents, and my parents, my dad, before he finished college, joined the Peace Corps. and he had met my mom before he joined the Peace Corps, and they both went and were in Colombia and Spain. And when they came back to the United States in the 1960s, they didn't have anything. They had 2 kids. I was on the way, so there was going to be a 3rd kid. My dad didn't have his college degree yet. My mom was a teacher, but because she was pregnant, she couldn't get a job. And my dad was working and going to college. And I was asking them, well, how did you own a property? My dad was like, I was determined to own a property. And even though they had no credit, they had no background, they had, I think, less than $1,000 to their name, they were able to get a mortgage to get a house. And in fact, my mom even said, I don't know how we did it, but we got credit cards and we were using the credit cards to help us out. And they didn't know that when we were applying for the loan and everything. And I bring this up because if my parents were Black or African American, that would not have happened. They would never have had that ability to get a loan because of all the discrimination that was happening to be even able to get property. And I fast forward because part of that piece, right? My parents got a leg up because that house, they then were able to use that equity to get another house. And out of the next house that they got, because it was a house that was in foreclosure, they got a lot of equity for the next house, right? And that piece of accumulating wealth happens when you can have property. And for Black and African Americans, they've been completely excluded from that because of a variety of things, ranging from whites, like literally mobs coming to where they might have gotten properties and scaring them out, causing harm, et cetera, to the property, to things like restrictive covenants in property. And if you don't know what that is, it's a legal term. And what it means is you can have, it's kind of like bylaws in a way, like a community can have rules to the community or association. And some of those literally read that only Caucasians can live in this house. But they did do an exclusion that Blacks were allowed to come in to do domestic work. And literally those were written in. So if anyone owned that property or were to sell the property, they could only sell it to Caucasians.
Yeah, and it's mentioned here in the comments. Yeah, Black and Indigenous folks were stripped from their bill.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And still in extreme uneasiness, still shamefully have to be careful and about where people need to, to choose to live. Like that's a choice to live in certain places is also a privilege, right?
Yeah.
And so Jody is talking about this restrictive covenants in the process. So we read everything.
Yeah.
When we were signing our papers and we were reading everything, and we were very sick a couple weeks ago with COVID. So we're trying to read all these things, being very, careful. And I turned and looked at Jody, and she had just read a restrictive covenant, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She looked sick. She looked pale and sick to her stomach. Like, we're moving in an area that has restrictive covenants. And
I said, we can't buy this house because I had literally just read the covenant I just talked about, that it literally read that only Caucasians can live here. Blacks can be here if they're going to be domestic workers for the day.
And granted, she hadn't read through the whole thing yet. And I wasn't even close to it because I was sick. I was like, today's your day to read. But she was reading a little more. We texted the realtor, like, what is this all about? And the realtor called us right away. And it turned out that, before we tell you the end of what she was reading, the realtor answered the call and basically said, my mom used to be a realtor. She said, oh, no. Your mom and I worked really hard to get this language out. This is in all these, and this is talking Northern California in the 90s and 2000s and 10s and 20s. This language was still there. So then, as I'm on the phone, we've got her on speakerphone because we're like, we can't do this. We can't buy this. Jody continues to read and discovered
that at near the very end of all and there were numerous restrictive covenants in that piece, but that was the one that made me sick to my stomach, was a provision saying that the restricted covenants ended in 1965. So it was at the time, I think the house was built in the 30s or 40s.
40s, yeah.
So there was a provision that they automatically eliminated in 1965.
But still, it was just like the fact that here we are reading these and people say racism isn't a thing. I mean, it just blows me away. And that, and it kind of really put more into light the privilege of us being able to, as a gay couple, there were no barriers to us buying a home. Granted, we're moving into an area that isn't super gay friendly all the time, but it was painful to read it and see it and to and that's for us in a 5, 20, 30-minute period, and people are living it every day of their life.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as I was talking to my parents as well regarding ownership and my own family and what that meant, I also learned, I don't know if I told you this, I learned that my grandfather had said that he wouldn't sell his house to anyone that was Black.
I didn't know
So that was really hard to hear as I'm doing this research and learning more about my own family history and racism that exists within my own family and within myself. And that's part of why I'm doing this. So it's been really hard to learn more and more. And I know I need to continue to be educated regarding things that I didn't know about, all the challenges that Black, Indigenous, and people of color face daily, and have faced for a really long time in this country.
Yeah. I'm just reading a comment from one of our participants. Many rural and suburban locales that I know where it's wise to choose to buy because of financial advantages, but still not comfortable when deciding to buy for me and my wife. Yeah, there's that division, right? There's that disparity. And yeah, we struggled in our decision. And we also know that we need to take care of ourselves so that we can continue to put out into the world and take care of others. And that's the hard thing. I was actually, I bring this up a lot, but we had a panelist, Caress Fitch, and I can try to get her website so you can look her up, but Caress was a guest and on our webinar. You can look it up on YouTube actually, because we talked about microaggressions, and my forgetting their pronouns is a microaggression. So they shared with me one day, because I was really having a hard time, I was very tired, and I was really overwhelmed emotionally with everything that was going on. This was in 2020. So it was after the George Floyd murder, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, et cetera. There were so many, I can't even name them all, and I will. But I really, I was struggling, and they said, excuse me, Misha, are you taking care of yourself? Are you resting? Are you, eating well and exercising? And I'm like, I actually haven't been. They said, well, you can't be a good ally if you're not taking care of yourself. And so part of our decision to purchase a home instead of continue renting was so that we could create some kind of revenue and continue to put money into the communities and the, publications and businesses that are owned by BIPOC.
Yeah, we have some more comments. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Sucks to be on losing end of this all, and to see certain ones continually winning and getting away with this nonsense.
Absolutely. And another comment, Black and Indigenous folks can't hide their skin color to move freely in society to try to acquire housing, healthcare, education. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the argument constantly. There's nothing to hide. I've had my own challenges with discrimination and racism based on the color of my skin. And you can see the difference in complexion here, but I still have incredible privilege. And that's why we encourage our listeners to find sustainable action. We encourage our listeners to do what they can. And there are, even in the BIPOC, communities, there are people who have more privilege than other people. And if we can all continue to have sustainable participation in dismantling white supremacy, then we will have a better, what's the word I'm looking for?
Better world.
Yeah, better world. Thank you. And for those of you who are late, I apologize. I still have COVID brain. I'm very exhausted and tired. I have fibromyalgia. And so I may not make sense all the time tonight, but I'm really grateful that you're all here. And I've asked Jody to do a lot more of the talking. So, but sometimes I get really passionate and I jump in, and I need to like step back a little bit so Jody can do more for tonight.
And I would say, you know, along with that comment regarding, you know, you can't hide your skin color. It's also what people think based on names and even sometimes language. Like if I remember correctly, there was a study regarding mortgages and getting loans. And if people thought a name was associated with a certain race, Blacks, then they were less likely to give the person a loan, even if everything else regarding credit score and everything else was the same.
Same with jobs. They turned in a job application. There were people changing their names so they could at least get an interview. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, are there any other, the chat's been pretty active. Any other thoughts in the chat? Again, if anyone wants to come on, just let us know. But any other thoughts regarding housing? I mean, there's so much we could say with housing, but I just want to give a pause for a second to see if anyone wants to add anything else in the chat, whether it be a question, comment.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the associated traumas and other ill healths can be even more overwhelming. Yeah. There's little tangent here, but there's a lot of research regarding how racism, intergenerationalism affects the body and how that trauma affects the body. And that also adds to everything that Blacks, Indigenous people of color are experiencing on a daily basis.
There are housing practices. So there's a comment from one of the guests. There are housing practices in Michigan that state laws that people of color cannot own the land or occupy it. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. And racism is a public health crisis.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see that play out in so many ways, but even with COVID, right? There's huge issues regarding racism and public health, and then also access to healthcare, as someone said before, on that piece.
Yeah. It's depressing, honestly. And yet at the same time, the only way to move forward is for us. We have energy and time. And if there are people who have money, to continue we just can't let our guard down. We can't stop fighting, and we can't stop educating. We can't step. Yes, I agree with you. Racism is also unintelligent.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Please let it out. I'm so glad. So this person said, this is a good space. Thank you. Nice to have a channel to let this all out. And again, if you want your voice heard and up here with us, we're happy to bring you on camera. We want you to know that we're also open at the end of the live stream. We'll stop the recording, and anybody who wants to just come on and have a conversation with us, we usually offer another 15-20 minutes just for you to breathe. And the other thing is, some of you who may have tried to register on Eventbrite and then had to go through Zoom, on Eventbrite, when you go to see the details for your event, there are some links to resources that we've compiled and collected, or are sharing from other people having compiled and collected. So please definitely take advantage of that, but also check your spam box in case you're not getting our emails through either Eventbrite or Zoom, because we don't actually write down your email. So it's either through Zoom or Eventbrite, where we send a whole crap load of resources, and we'll also put it in the chat here for you to save and share. And you want to read the next comment?
Comment was, it starts in the development stages, birth to death. As an end-of-life doula, I have compiled live data of people who are denied hospice or dying with grace options.
Oh, that's awful. Oh, that's so
painful. Are you able to share some of that data? I don't know.
Yeah, that is painful.
Wow.
I actually, for a short time, was a beginning of life doula, and the discrepancy in the services and the access that the families had. Unfortunately, when I would go on shift, I was Spanish speaking, so I could help Spanish speaking families get the care and the compassion that they needed, which it definitely varied. I mean, I worked with a lot of fabulous nurses and doctors, but if you don't speak the language and then you expect someone who's birthing, who's got horrible contractions, to try to understand you, I mean, that's a lot, and so being able to have someone there to speak the language and to be compassionate, and navigating kind of like the mediation between the doctors and the families, so that you can birth your child in a loving, compassionate way. But yeah, to be denied hospice or dying with grace options that's awful.
I know you said I think the yes was to my question, if you're able and willing to share any. Are you willing to come on with us to share that and speak, or do you want to put some information in the chat, or where we can get more information in the chat? What are you comfortable with?
Okay.
Oh, great.
All right. Let me see if I can pull you in. That would be wonderful.
And if anyone else wants to join, let us know.
Yeah, feel free. Just a reminder, before I pull you on, just a reminder, we are live streaming on my Facebook, and we also do put this on my YouTube channel.
So make sure you're good with that.
If you're comfortable with that, say yes, so that I can feel comfortable pulling you on, because we don't want to put anybody on the spot. I'm just waiting because I don't want to pull you on to.
If you're good with knowing that it's on live stream right now on Facebook, and that
yes, okay,
great.
All right, cool. All right,
let's see if it works.
So I am bringing on Victoria, and let me just make you a co-host. Then you can undo your video and your mic.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes. Hi.
How beautiful.
My pleasure. I'm Victoria.
I'm so glad you were willing to come on. You're enjoying a
Thank you.
Tour.
You might hear the city of New York City in the background. So
great.
Fabulous. Quick disclaimer.
So Victoria, tell us more about your work that you're doing and what the data that you're collecting.
Yeah.
Yes. So just a quick little background for me. So a little bit before COVID happened, I was a social worker for 6-7 years, and I was working with transitional families, and then I ended up working with people who are chronically indigent and experience homelessness. And something that was often happening where people weren't having the access, whether it's like benefits or placement or even supportive healthcare, because they're chronically indigent, and then they deal with all the socioeconomics and the racial inequities that exist. So barriers on top of barriers. Now, when COVID happened, I continued working with these communities, but then I started recording this data, because something that often happens is lived experience is not considered data, but it's tangible data. But these metrics aren't often put into ways for people to see them. So how are patient outcomes if we're not recording them? And also we're not giving people who have tools, and vocational tools are things of access and privilege. And when you have been chronically homeless, or you've been displaced, or you've had hardships in life, there are a lot of times you don't want to go through the normal metrics, or you probably don't have the capacity to go through these normal metrics. So I started recording lived experience, and I started documenting how many times they've been denied, and and going through the process with them. So whether it be like hospice or getting the forms, like a lot of them are saying like, hey, I didn't know I was eligible for Medicare because I'm homeless. I'm like, well, let's find out what resources are out there. And it's something that so often that throughout the end of life, people are disregarded. And when you have all these barriers, and especially when you've been stigmatized, you don't want to look for sacred places to help you, be comforted, especially during the dying times. And, I would have people saying that, like, I don't have family in a traditional way, but I have my community, which is family. I was like, that's family. And do you find it sacred? And do you want these people in your space? So like, how can we die well, and how can we make it beautiful, and how can we give you the dignity that you need? Because everyone deserves that.
Everyone
absolutely.
Yeah.
And So I started, intentionally recording this stuff with their permission and saying that like, hey, like, I want you to know that for me, it was just the thing that I was collecting because these are narratives of people and everyone has a story to tell and everyone has their history.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that this anthology was created and sacred. And, for the past, like, I have 3.5 years worth of data and I've helped at least 36 people transition.
Wow.
So it's a thing too of just making sure that the resources are out there, but also their stories are out there. Their records are out there and someone knows that like you were loved, you were cared for. And, I want you to die well, because a lot of times we come into this world of trauma and that trauma stays with us, but release it however you want to. And a lot of times people don't want to release it too, because it's something that you've held on for so long. It's how do you let this go?
Right.
It's also a bondage of my identity. And it's sad that sometimes people's identity is so bound up in this trauma that has nothing to do with you. And it's almost like a superlative that someone gives you, but it doesn't benefit you in any way. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, Victoria. Someone in the chat said qualitative data is just as important, if not more, than quantitative.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting too, our society and healthcare system. We'll give you this form, but we don't ask you any follow-up questions. And as someone who experienced postpartum, I realized like I was going to my doctor's appointment like religiously 3rd trimester every week. And then after I had my baby, they're like, well, we'll see you in 6 weeks. And I'm like, what? That's it? No, nothing else. So I have resources and I have privileges and I have all this access, and I can't even imagine with someone who doesn't. And there's so many barriers to quality of life. So, hopefully I can help the transition a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's a comment saying, thank you for sharing and what you do, Victoria. And then someone else said, sounds like great work Victoria has been doing. Hearing voices, real advocacy, and cultural competency are key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I'm curious, Victoria, when we were talking earlier about the housing, I think all of it's related, where if you can't afford proper housing, you're also likely going to get illnesses because of mold or whatever other kinds of things take place. And I imagine that when you're working with these people who are not even being given the opportunity to die with grace, that they're coming from a place where they haven't really been able to live with grace either.
Yeah. And, when we think about housing, it's a cultural identity shift, right? And, to be housed is something too, where it's almost like a marker of who you are as a being. But if you think about it too, homelessness is not just one tangent. There's so many different reasons why people become homeless and why people have experienced chronically homeless. Like, for example, if you experience homelessness as a child, you're more likely to experience it in adulthood because it's a normative habit. And a lot of us may not even realize what homeless may be. It may be living in a car, it may be couch surfing, it may be all these variable factors. And for example, say if you qualified for SSI or SSDI and you don't have a permanent address, you can't receive these benefits.
That's
so
right.
All these things too are barriers to having equity and to having access or resources. And, even if there was a shelter set up, there's so many the bureaucracy behind it makes it so difficult for people to even have the opportunity to do it, to get mail, to receive things, to even, let's say if you applied for Medicaid, Medicare, where are you going to receive the care? And it's all these things where it's just like, it makes it so much harder for people to have an opportunity to be successful. If anything, it feels like the system is designed for people to fail intentionally. And when we think about housing, of like, even if you were to have housing, what is the quality of housing? And do you even report in your landlord? Because if you do, it might be a catch-22. Now you lose your housing.
Right.
Now you're barred from housing. Now you have to pay 3 times for the rent for upfront costs. And, all these things that like don't make a society successful. So it's difficult. And I think too, the mythology of people experiencing homeless, like probably have more resources than people who are, navigating the system. I say this as someone who was a social worker. I was learning more information from people who have experienced it because their intelligence is not always matriculated and told in a way that should be respected and should have authority behind it. Like I would have people saying that, like, even if I need emergency services, I'm not going to call 911 because they're going to judge me. They're going to,
Oops, you muted.
Oh, you muted yourself, Victoria.
It's going to go wrong, basically. You call 911, you're not likely to get the service or care you need. You're likely to get in trouble or even shot.
Yeah. Or even, like I've been in situations where I've called 911 and the fire department's first, and they're like, oh, we know this person. And off bat, there's already a judgment. There's already that disposition. So it's like, and they're like, I want to go to this hospital. And they're like, well, we're going to go to this one because it's closer. And the people are like, I don't even get a choice in this.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's already, all these choices, all these access are already being taken away. So imagine that you're LGBT and you're Black or you're non-binary, you're brown, and you have all these things. And let's say if you have a speech impediment or you have a delay, these make the quality of care is already fractured.
Yeah.
There is a question for you in the chat, and I just want to bring up too, when we talk about homelessness, because of my line of work, that domestic violence is one of the leading causes of homelessness. And obviously there's an intersection between violence against women and Black and Indigenous women and people of color. So I just want to kind of throw that in when we talk about homelessness. There's multiple layers there, which Victoria was speaking to as well, and that adds another layer that we can't not overlook regarding violence against women and that intersection with race and how that occurs in our society, and not just in the United States but globally.
Yeah.
But Victoria, there was a question, and again, you get to choose whether you want to respond or not, but it was from your work. Can you speak to the criminality and violence of injustice?
I think if we're just talking about it just from a systematic lens, like a lot of our systems are built in violence, even the way that we portray it. So like, if you think about systems that are there to create, for an example, when I was working in transitional housing, I had a mom who, she sold drugs, but that's how she's making her rent. By law, I'm supposed to report her, and CPS is supposed to come and take the child away. But me being a person, knowing that if they take this child away, the reunification process is not real. So how do I support this mom? And also, how do I shift the lens of saying that, like, hey, like, you don't realize this, but you're an entrepreneur and you're a business person, right? Like, giving her tools and language for what she's doing too, because like the fact that you're doing this and you've been doing this for so long, like it says you are successful and you have the ability and skill set. But the way that you're going about it, you're going to lose your children. And I, as a human being, I'm supposed to report you by law, legally. But if I do that, I know the system is not built. And also, you've already had a criminal record. So all these things are against you. So it's like, what do you do? It's literally a catch. I don't even say catch 22. That phrase is weird. It's problematic. It's just problematic to begin with. And if you think about too, when we think about violence being portrayed on people, where CPS is not a system that has been designed for reunification and for the process to support families. It's a system intentionally created to remove families and displace them. And even now too, there's so many reported cases where CPS has missed so many mile markers of abuse or cases to support the individual. Where if you're in this program, it's more likely for you to have your benefits reduced if you start making more money. Well, intentionally, like, we want people to be self-sufficient, but we're not giving them a platform to be successful. What do you mean that if I start making more money, then my benefits get reduced? Well, I'm going to work less and I'm not going to be able to provide for my family because you've given me this like weird pedestal where you want me to be successful, but you're going to take away my success, and you're going to take this away in such a stark way that it defeats my family from growing or having even the ability to have security, have a savings, have assets accumulating.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Victoria. We actually were participating in a Belong Circle, which is something here right now in the Bay Area. And we were all coming together of different backgrounds to read one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. And one of the women that we met through this process is a senior. And because she was getting more money from, I'm not sure where, she was potentially losing her place of where she was living. It was an apartment building. And because of her increased pay, she was going to be kicked out of her lodging.
Yeah. And I'm just going to jump in real quick and just do a little bit of what Code Switch calls explanatory note and some other podcasts. And Victoria, you might have said it, but I don't know if people caught it. CPS stands for Child Protective Services. It is a division that every state has and every county has. They're designed, I'm going to put that in quotes because Victoria was pointing to the fact that there's a lot of issues with the Child Protective Services system. But essentially, if there's a belief that child is being abused, neglected, mistreated in any capacity, then they come in and they're supposed to work towards reunifying a child with the parent or parents wherever possible, but that does not happen, as Victoria was stating, particularly when we look at children of color. There's lots of studies out there regarding that they're more often or more quickly removed from their parents and then don't get reunified with their parents, and it's a huge problem with the system.
Yeah.
So just a quick explanatory note there for listeners that might not be familiar with the legal system, just to give you a little bit of background there. And Victoria,
thank you for because
go ahead.
One thing I am learning is language is very important, and it's intentional of how it's explained and the process behind it. And I want to go back and preface that I'm sure the intention of CPS was not to be as harmful as it is.
Yes.
But in practicality, and I think too, that's where a lot of this lived data doesn't go into application of why the narratives of people who've had CPS, their children removed for whatever variant, for whatever reason, and the difficulties and the barriers and the access and the lack of support from the community, that there aren't a lot of wraparound services. It's a really punitive program that is not designed. And also too, the workers there too are put in a position that they cannot have a quality caseload that's successful. You cannot say that you can be successful and you're trying to maintain a status and benchmark and do your job diligently with all the barriers, because it's not a support system. It's not a baton being passed on. It's just something hopefully someone catches it, and wherever it lands, it lands.
That's really great.
I worked in Montana and on the reservation, and something that I was really surprised is Native law is protective of the children that are there, and thankfully that they have their own support systems where they don't have to deal with the same bureaucracy as the US judicial system, because they've had so many cases of their children not being protected in ways that they've created agencies to intentionally respond in cases. And of course, there's so many things, there's so many variables for there too. But you see people who have sovereign law and how things really fall by the wayside. So imagine us who, we're trusting these systems, but there's no check and balance, right? Child Protective Services, CPS, is kind of like this umbrella, and we're just supposed to go with it. But no one has really revamped the system to see are we understanding cultural dynamics, and are we also okay with saying that there's some customs and cultures that people may adhere to that don't go by this European centric model that is based off of. and it
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Yeah,
Like there's some
absolutely.
cultures too where like me talking to a child in a stern way is just culturally appropriate, and it may not seem like gentle parenting, and it may seem confusing, but if we don't add these dialogue and these nuances to it, we're continuing to cause harm to these communities. And if we're not taking accountability and saying that like I may have caused harm and it's not intentional, but how can I do better, then we won't do better, and we're going to keep re-victimizing people. And we've been doing that for like 3-4 generations now.
Yes.
And then you see it from like literally from birth to death, like how it happens in the cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm like rambling.
No,
that's great.
that's
I'm
absolutely,
actually,
and I'm sorry.
yeah, I was just really glad that you brought that up, because as you were speaking, I started thinking about, my mind immediately went to the school system. It's basically the school to prison pipeline, right? You've got systems that are set up with the intention to support, to educate, to care for, to help people thrive. And then what they do is they end up just completely shrinking people and bringing them down and putting them through the system in a way that they are not getting that. In fact, it's the opposite. They're being taken advantage of. They're being hurt. They're being harmed. Their whole livelihood is being stripped from them. And it just reminded me, I'm got really passionate and upset about this, but it just reminded me of when I first started being a classroom teacher. And there was a student that got really angry in my class. This was a person of color, of Native American background, and really angry, like flipping off and getting in. And I was so new to teaching, I didn't know what to do. And so I called the administration to support me in having a conversation with this student. And what they did, and I said to them, I want some help in having a conversation. They took him out of my class, and apparently that was the last straw. And that student ended up being expelled. And I was so upset. I cried for days and weeks, actually. I still remember it, obviously. This was over 30 years ago. I was so angry because that's not for the help that I asked for. This student, I don't care how many times they had this problem in other classrooms, it was the first time for me. And I wanted more opportunities. And I didn't get that because the system wasn't made up for that. They didn't have the time for it. And yeah.
And think about this, like in a place of privilege, let's say it's a school district that is affluent, right? Mm-hmm. They find the time and the resources, and the weird thing about it is there's funding in everything. And something there's a make-believe that there's no funding for things. There's funding for everything if there needs to be. And
but they find the funding for the kids. For the kids they want to find the funding for.
Yes.
I was in
you
an
guys will find funding for the basketball team. You'll find funding for a basketball team. You'll find funding for a football team that's performing. But you can't find funding to add a social worker or to add a therapist or to add programming, right? We're not teaching kids coping skills. We're not teaching kids like, you responding to this is normal. You feeling upset is normal. But do you want to give your power away, or how can we make it constructive for you? And also too, how do we support the families, right? It's a duality where everyone assumes that it's supposed to be the teacher's responsibility, and teachers are like, well, what about the families? It's like, it's all of our responsibilities, because these kids eventually become adults. Like there's the thought process that are like, well, they'll be fine. It's like, no, they won't be fine. They'll learn bad habits and continue those bad habits until someone calls them out, or until those habits are not constructive and they're penalized for it.
Yep.
And we have a society that we've been penalizing people for the things that they've been coping. A lot of these tactics are survival. And we're supposed to say that like, well, it's a whole community thing. And also too, we experience this vicariously too, right? I'm sure we've had a coworker where they haven't showed up in their best ways too. It's like, maybe they didn't have the tools or the language to discuss the things that they're experiencing. And now we are going through the process of being the victims or the abusers too, because we don't realize how we may show up too. Sometimes we're the abusers and we don't even realize that as well.
Thank you, Victoria.
Yeah. And in the chat was expressed trauma is often penalized, severely penalized. And that's what Victoria and everyone was just speaking to. So, absolutely.
I want to make sure, this is a real nice impromptu opportunity to have you on as a panelist, Victoria. And I know you put your email in the chat, so we're going to follow up with you. But typically, first of all, we don't take advantage of our panelists' time. And I don't know if you identify as a person of color, but I want to just kind of let you know that as a panelist, we do have a stipend, or we promote a business, or we'll put the stipend towards a charity that you would like to have us do that for. So we will follow up and email you. But if you do have if you're in private practice and have your own business and want to promote that here, we would love to be able to offer the space for you to do that. But, again, up to you. It's just a wonderful thing for you to pop on and say that you'll share your voice with us today.
Thank you. So I am just right now just taking time to respite and spend time with my daughter. She's 10 months old this Friday. And the work that I do is pro bono. So I just service, I'll get a call and saying like, hey, I have someone who's dying at the shelter. Are you available? And then, I'll support them throughout their time. So everything I do is free. I'm in partnership, and I shouldn't say partnership. I've talked to the local Trader Joe's by me. So whenever they have flowers that they are discontinuing, like I'll create like beautiful services for people, because death is something that we all experience, and I think community is important. So having a beautiful death is also very important to me. Making sure that people are cleaned and sacred and dressed and ready for their transition.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll follow up with you with an email. So make sure you look through your spam folder.
I look forward to it.
But it's going to be coming from Misha at mishasafran.com.
Okay.
And we do want to, there's somebody in the chat that I want to read what they've written. Before this ends, I'd like to ask and have you to respond. I honestly feel enriched to be able to air about how troubling and upsetting these outcomes are from sinister racist construct. But I'd like to hear from you, the creators of this space, how you hope for participants, particularly the victims of it, people of color, to benefit from this discussion. This is my first time participating, so I'm sure you've spoken about the purpose of the discussion in the past and many times. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. We did say it at the beginning of the webinar, but we definitely want to attend to this question. Before we do so, because I want to just make sure we close properly with Victoria. Victoria, so we will follow up with you. We will email, and just really thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your life with us in this short amount of time.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you putting information in the chat and then being willing to come on and share your experiences and insights based on your life, and really just speaking from your heart with us. Truly appreciate it.
And I want to just ask you, based on what this other participant is saying, what do you feel for you might be the benefit from this discussion? Victoria.
For me, can you hear me well?
Yeah. Yeah, a little louder.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, better. Oops,
we lost.
Now we
for
can.
me,
there you go. Okay, we got you.
Hold on. I'm realizing for myself, when I hold on to trauma, I show up as a lesser version of myself. And for me, it's an experience to let go a lot of the things that are holding me back, because no one deserves to have a fractured version of me, and I don't deserve to have a fractured version of me. And it's one of those things too where I am trying to be more intentional about letting it go when I can, because a lot of the time that hurt doesn't serve you. Like it can be a catalyst for things, but oftentimes it's a barrier for your success. It's a barrier because you're kind of blinded by it. And for a really long time, like I was swimming in like rage and anger, and I didn't understand why I didn't understand why. I was just like ready to fight everyone. And it's because I was allowing that like hurt to manifest in a different way. And you don't realize it too, but like your back starts aching.
Yeah.
And when your back starts aching, you assume that, oh, it's because you didn't get a lot of rest. But it's like, how can you get rest when you're in the stress? You're in the stress and your body's tight all the time. So it never has the opportunity to relax. And you know, there's something that I was reading a few years back when I was doing my grad school, and talked about how patients were coming into the ER from a Cambodian community, and they had all these back pains and they couldn't understand why. And it's because of the trauma from all their experiences, because a lot of them came from the same community, but a lot of them had experienced this trauma, and without even realizing, it was manifesting in a body part. And it was an ER physician who said, I was asking them, hey, like, do you know this person? They're like, I don't know this person. But they're like, it's so strange because they come from your community. And without even realizing, that trauma had been passed on for 2 or 3 generations.
Yeah.
And it was part of their DNA. And you know, every once in a while that story will come to my mind where I'm like, oh, unclench your jaw, unclench your fist, relax, take a deep breath. You have more control than you think you do. And even if it doesn't come out in your favor, you have more control than you do. And there is no mistake. There's no mistake for why you are where you're at and who you are. It's all for a reason. And I also have to think about, like, I'm sorry that the people who have created the systems are so hurt themselves that they feel like you have to punish those around you for just existing, right? And so I think these spaces, because, you know, sometimes you feel like you're going through it alone, and then you realize you're not. And then you realize you have community. And you know, the joke of kind of like trauma bonding, like, unfortunately, this is trauma bonding, but it's trauma release too. It's trauma, like, we are reclaiming this, and we're making this sacred. And we are just taking homage and saying that I'm sorry that this happened to you. And I'm sorry that there's probably going to be another opportunity where this happens again. But you know what? We're going to heal and grace, and we're going to let this be glorious. And, you know, that's the only thing we can do. And the next time you go for a walk, I hope that sunshine hits you in a place and you hear a music that just makes you feel so soulful and alive, because you deserve that. We all deserve that. And these places are just reminders of that. And I thank them for existing. I thank you guys for creating that, because without this, you know, I couldn't have this opportunity to share a little bit, a fragment of who I am. And I get to learn more about you guys too, in community.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to respond to the question, because it was, of course, asked of us, and I thank you, Victoria, for answering it from your own experience. When I'm feeling emotional. When we created this, I know you're going to say that, when I created this webinar, my hope was that friends, family, community members that were dear to me would feel like they were being cared for and held and given the space to come here and share openly. And that's what it's been. And sometimes when we don't have a guest, and we've met a lot of people who I didn't know through word of mouth, and what they've all shared with us is that things came up they didn't expect to come up. So what Victoria is saying has been really true, that there's been like this beautiful release. And then we've also had some webinars where we've gotten to apologize because, you know, for me, I was busy raising kids, working full time, even an extra few jobs. And I couldn't be active as a high schooler and college student. I was out there in protests and doing all sorts. And then there was this 20-year gap. And I apologized to some friends that were on this group with us, because the webinar with us, because I said, that's 20 years of your lives, of your ancestry, of your generations where I wasn't participating in changing the world. And I know that doesn't make me a bad person, But I feel like one of the things that we've talked about is creating sustainable action and being models of sustainable action. And so what we hope is that as we create this space, that the more white people who watch it and read our resources and become more learned and healthier allies, that it will impact the lives that are victims, the people of color, the survivors, as I would refer to them as. And it is also my hope that people who are here can share. If you know somebody who needs a stipend and they want to just come up and share what their life is about, invite them, and there's income for them. So there's a lot of different opportunities and avenues in which I'm hoping it'll make a difference and impact and improve the lives of people of color. And so, it just, and it's opened my heart even more. So I think I've somewhat answered the question of the guest. And there's probably more inside of me, but because I'm not feeling great, so it's not coming out as eloquently as I feel like it could. But I would love to let Jody have an opportunity to share. And I also just want to quickly say, I did see some of the comments about how, there are a lot of differences historically and lived between, people of color, Black, Indigenous. Even we're talking about able-bodied and disabled, there's a lot of different kinds of experiences. And this space is really here to say, we are all valuable. We are all important. We all should have the right. It shouldn't be a privilege. It should be the right to live with positive health care, to live with compassionate educators and community members, to live in a system that doesn't throw our kids into prison, to live in a system that allows us to have dialogue and communicate with heart as opposed with hatred. So that's my take.
Yeah. I don't know that I would add too much more. I mean, I think the big piece is a space for Black people of color, Indigenous individuals that are on to be heard without interruption, without someone saying, educate us. It really, the idea was to have a space where panelists could come on, and that we weren't going to say what the questions were. It was really here, share what you want to share, whatever that may be. And what we found is that all of our panelists have said, similar to Victoria, that they felt that way, they felt heard, and it was opportunity for them to speak. And as Misha indicated, they talked about things that they didn't think that would come up on it. So that for me was a big piece from that perspective of just having a safe space for panels to be heard, but really, I think beyond that, for everyone, right, to be heard, because people have opportunity to put things in the chat and to listen. So it was just really creating a safe space where that could happen, with the idea that, and I think this is important too, every panelist that we've had on, even with the way this country has treated them, and still treats them, have hope. Yeah. And the hope, and it's beautiful. And the hope comes from really people connecting, people knowing each other, so that we know who someone is, instead of automatically jumping to judgment based on the color of their skin, or their attitude, or their name, or whatever it is. And I think that that's a purpose of this too, that we're trying to connect people. And sometimes we have one person listening, and sometimes we have 10. But the idea is, the more we connect with each other and see each other as people, the hope is that the barriers and the racism, the microaggressions, and that breaks down, and that we all have the same opportunities, instead of me having more opportunities because my color, my skin's white. So I think that's a piece too, and hopefully that answers the question and we didn't talk too much there. Sorry.
No, it's great. And we put the statement in the chat, and we also offered a lot of links. And if you are somebody who would like to be a panelist, or knows of someone who you think would like to be a panelist, that link is in there as well. And then I mentioned Sonia Renee Taylor at the beginning. She has an Instagram, Our Bodies Are Not an Apology, and just a fabulous, yeah, her voice is really strong and beautiful. And then a lot of other resources, and that'll also come through as an email. So if this is too much to click on and save, especially if you're on your phone, please look for the follow-up email through Zoom, the Zoom platform. I don't, except for Victoria, who I got permission from, I don't typically send emails to anybody from my email. If you would like to be on my newsletter or receive future information about what I do, you can certainly, go to the Eventbrite and follow, or you can send me an email and I'm happy to add you. But we're going to stop the recording and live streaming so that if there's anybody here who would like to join us as a conversation, hopefully with cameras on, we would love that. And so we'll say goodbye to our Facebook friends and family and global community. And I'll stop that now with the live streaming. Stop live stream. And then I'm going to stop the recording. So thanks everybody for attending.